Hello and welcome to my review of the Arken Optics EPL-4 6x24 scope. Before we get into looking at the details of the scope itself, we are going to handle the boring business of looking in the box. And in that box we will be receiving our manual, a set of bungee lens covers, little packet of extras, which is the Allen key for the turret and the cleaning cloth for the lenses. We also get a nice little Arken sticker, our sunshade, which would screw into the front, and in the box there's also some foam padding that protects the scope if you're storing it or shipping it, that sort of thing. So I'm going to close this up, and then we will take a peek inside of our manual as well, because I'm going to give you the physical specifications of the scope before we get on to looking at it. Obviously it is a 6-24x magnification. It has a 50mm objective. They're claiming 3.5 inches of eye relief out the back. Our field of view is going to be 18.5 feet at 6 power and 4.6 feet at 24 power, and both of those are at 100 yards. Our tube size is 30mm. We happen to have the mil radian version here, so we're going to have 1/10 mil adjustments in our turrets. The reticle is on the first focal plane. This one, as is stated on the back of the box here, is the VHR mil reticle, which is essentially a mil dot reticle, but it's hash marks instead of dots. We do receive our zero stop in this version. We have resettable turrets. The elevation turret has a maximum of 20 mils of adjustment. The windage turret is limited to 12 mils of adjustment. We're getting 8 mils per rotation on the elevation and 6 on the windage. We have side parallax, we have illumination. They're claiming 13.8 inches in overall length from front to rear and 23.7 ounces of total weight. All right, let's see what the scale says about that weight. 25.5, so coming in a little over, about 2 ounces over the manufacturer's stated weight, but not particularly heavy for this size of scope and this magnification. Really sort of middle of the pack. You can find ones that are lighter, but there are plenty of examples that are 5, 6, even 10 ounces heavier. So we're not going to complain about the weight. It's about par for the course. But we're going to go ahead and look at the details of the scope itself. We're going to start here at the rear with our rear diopter, which is adjustable so that you can make corrections for your vision. I'm going to get it ran all the way out here to the end, which it does have a fairly generous amount of adjustment. I'm going to go ahead and turn that back in a little bit, and then I'm going to try to hold it real still. We'll see if we see any movement, which honestly I don't see any. Can I feel any? Ooh, maybe just a tiny little bit in there. That's not bad at all. That's nothing to complain about. Go ahead and turn that back in, just because I use it at about that distance. Make my life easier when I go to set this back up. Anyway, so that also, there's enough knurling on there to get a good grip, or enough, coarseness on that dial to get a good grip, but there is a sufficient amount of tension that you definitely have to make an effort to turn that. It's not just going to rotate from a bump. So that's well tensioned, well designed. Moving forward, we're going to get to our magnification. I'm going to go ahead and dial it back down to 6 to start. Right there at 6 at 12 o'clock. And as we rotate around to the bottom, we see that this is where the serial number is, would be 180 degrees. And we're maybe 20 degrees past that, so we're probably looking at about 200 degrees of rotation. And we also see that this does not have any kind of integrated throw lever, which is unfortunate. I wish that it did. That is quite a bit of throw to have to try to do it, with your fingers, especially if you were on a rifle where you're not going to be able to do big sweeps because your fingers are going to potentially bump into the receiver of the rifle. So I may eventually get one of the aftermarket throw levers, or maybe even the Arken throw lever that they sell for this. But this is the way it came, so we're just going to look at it as it comes to us normally. Moving forward from there, actually one other thing I want to say. Get this in the middle of our field of view here. So if you look closely at the seam between the magnification ring and the rear bell, it does have just a little bit of play. I've seen scopes with more, but I've seen plenty of scopes with less or none. So this one does have just a little bit of front to rear play in that magnification ring. Anyway, moving forward, we're going to look at, take the cap off of our windage turret, which is covered but is still something of a target style turret. We're going to get a closer look at these when we do the in-depth look at the turrets here in a little bit, but it has a toolless removal system, so you can just pop that off of there, be able to lift your turret off and reset that to 0. I like that feature quite a bit, especially on a cap turret where you're not going to be doing it too often and there's not any chance of that popping loose with the cap on. So that's convenient. It'd be interesting to see how easy that is to do with cold fingers, or with gloves on. I bet you would probably still want to use the tool. On the elevation turret, we have really nice knurling up here. It's got a good bite. It's sharp enough without being like annoyingly sharp. I know some people like it as sharp as it can be, but you definitely get a good grip on there. You can hear that 0 stop, which I've already got set up just because I was testing it out. And like the windage turret, we're going to get a closer look at these elevation turrets, but I just want to show you that it does have 3 set screws that you would use to slide that turret back to 0, and then it has a 0 stop and a set screw for the 0 stop. But anyway, I do like that turret. It's got a really nice feel. So on the left side of the scope, we're going to have our parallax adjustment and our illumination. We'll start with the parallax. It goes all the way down to 10 yards. And as you'll see, most of our range of rotation on this dial is between 10 and 100 yards. And then between 100 yards and infinity, we maybe have another 25, maybe 30 degrees of rotation to account for everything from 100 to infinity. So it'll be interesting to see out in the field how the depth of field performs with that limited adjustment in our dial, or if it's going to be kind of finicky to get our parallax set properly for our different distances. But in any event, I assume that this scope was designed with air gunners and rimfire shooters in mind when they set this up, because they would like to have that very precise adjustment for small targets at different distances in what would be considered normal distances for air guns and rimfire. That being said, the dampening on this is very smooth and consistent. It doesn't grind, it doesn't hang up at all, and it has a nice positive stop at both ends. It doesn't feel mushy. And it has a nice amount of knurling here to where you're going to get a good grip on it. Now when it comes to the illumination dial, I cannot say the same. It's very tight, and it definitely snaps into the individual illumination notches with authority. It feels very firm, but these ridges on here are a little too soft edged. You could use a little bit more bite to let you get your finger on there where you're not going to be slipping, especially if you had gloves on or wet hands. I could see that being a little bit of a challenge to maybe get that clicked on in a hurry. That's really about my first grievance with any of these controls so far. It's just that I wish the illumination dial had a little bit better bite on those turret, or on that turret. We're going to go ahead and pop open our battery compartment now. There we go. And inside we're going to see a 6-finger cap with a reasonably good O-ring in there. You can keep the elements out where you wouldn't want them inside your electronics. Underneath our CR2032 battery, we see a pretty typical 3-dimple circuit board. And I do like how low profile this is. When it sits down on the turret, you're not going to be grabbing that and loosening it up by accident. The one disadvantage of it is that it is a little bit tricky to get that first thread started properly. I've had a few tries at it now, so I'm getting better at it. But when I first got this thing out of the box and was playing with it, getting that cap to seat down flat and grab the first thread was giving me some trouble. Hopefully though, if you buy this scope, you won't be changing batteries too often, so it won't be a real big problem. And once it's tightened down, it bottoms out nicely against that O-ring and is nice and tight. Make sure I got my illumination off so I don't kill that battery. All right. So what else? Moving forward, we have, rather subdued logo, and then our 50mm lens, and we can see the threads right here for our sunshade. They're nicely recessed where you're not going to ding them up by accident unless you really slam this on something. But overall, pretty good scope. I'm excited to see how it performs out in the field and just the overall glass quality. But I think that's all I need to talk about here for this intro, and we will move on to looking at the turrets and then the reticle before we go out in the field. I have a setup now to look at the reticle in this Arken scope. Arken refers to the reticle as the VHR mill reticle. And I've left the brightness a little overexposed so that we'll be able to clearly see how much dimming occurs as we go up through our magnification range. We're going to start out here at 6 power and make our way up. First stop is going to be at 10. You can see how much larger that reticle has become and more functional it would be if you were using it at that power. And we're going to go up to 20. Now we're starting to cut off the very bottom of the vertical stadia at the 6 o'clock position, but we still have, 9 usable mills. And then when we get to 24, the 3, 6, and 9 retain 8 mils of measurements, and you can see how much of our illumination has been lost as we got here to the top of the magnification range. Now keep in mind, this is not the brightest environment. In full daylight, when you have bright sunlight, the amount of dimming that you're going to see is going to be less. This would be more accurate towards something like towards sunset or sunrise, where you're not starting out with a tremendous amount of light to begin with. The other thing to notice on these is that on the vertical 12 o'clock stadia, we have our 1/10 mil hash marks above the 3 mil mark. So if you were using those for accurate measurement to do ranging, you could do that on the vertical one, whereas on the, the 3 and the 9 stadia, you're out there beyond the 6th mil to get those 1/10 mil hash marks, and then they are not present on the 6 o'clock. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and turn the illumination on so we can get an idea of what that looks like. And that is starting at the maximum brightness on the number 6 setting. I'm going to go ahead and now turn off some of my backlighting. And then we'll go ahead and go through our illumination. There is a stop or an off position in between each one of the brightness levels. So there we have 5, 4, 3, 2, and finally 1. Now 1 with the naked eye is actually a little bit brighter than that. The camera is kind of sitting on that just a little bit. But the number 1 position is pretty darn dim. Now we'll go ahead and turn these lights back on and get one final look at the reticle itself. You'll see that brightness comes back up a little bit. That is just the nature of the camera, that it tries to balance out the overall light level. But the brightness is not daylight bright. If you are thinking about this for that sort of application, it's not going to perform the way you want it to. I would say that the red is bright enough to be seen in shadowed areas or against dark backgrounds, but against light backgrounds or in broad daylight, it's just not going to really be a visible red at all. We're going to get that turned off, and I think we have covered everything we need to see here, and we will go ahead and move on to looking at the turrets. I have a setup now to look at our elevation dial. The first thing I'm going to do is give it a little spin and let you see and hear how it performs. And there you go. As you can see, that is a nice clicky turret. Each detent is sharp and stiff enough to prevent any real play when it's in that particular spot. And then you have a nice audible and tactile movement when you do actually make a move. Right there, we're coming up against the 0 stop, and that also has a nice positive mechanical stop. Alright, so let's get this turret off and see what all is making the magic happen. The first thing we need to do is loosen up our brass set screw. This is a 2mm Allen wrench, so if you lose the little one that comes with it, you can replace it easily. If you have standard Allen wrenches, a 5/64 will also work. It will be slightly loose inside the screw, so you'll want to be careful when you're doing that. And then that brass set screw loosens up and allows the 0 stop set screw to be retracted, at which point you will see that, oop, didn't get it out far enough. At that point you can dial without the 0 stop if that's something you want to do. But in any event, whether you have it engaged or disengaged, you'll want to return that brass set screw down against it, just so that you don't have it walking out on you when you're making adjustments. Don't over tighten it, it just needs a little bit of tension to hold it in place. It's reset. I do like to click it 1/10 away from the 0 stop when I'm setting it, so that I don't accidentally drive the set screw into the top of the 0, which you're going to see just in a second. There's an actual machined bar holding that in place. If all you're trying to do is set the 0, you actually don't need to remove that entirely. But I am going to show you what it looks like off. And we're going to be able to see our individual little revolution counters. And then this aluminum ring here is actually what establishes your zero, so you don't want to mess with that in any way, because that little bar, this little guy right here, is what is your mechanical stop for your zero. And those set screws that are used to hold this in place tension against this brass post. So again, you don't want to be too aggressive with them, because you don't want to mar that up to the point where it's going to prevent you from establishing your zero properly. And on the inside of that, you see the set screw that will make contact with your zero stop bar. So overall, a decent design. It's very simple to set up, and it works well. So you just put that on there loose. Hear how it hits up against it. You don't want to try to set this with it loose, because it will simply raise the turret up with that set screw. So you want to tighten down your 3 set screws that connect it to the post before you attempt to set that zero stop. But overall, I think that's everything we need to talk about on the elevation turret, and we will go ahead and look at our windage turret next. I have a setup now to look at our windage turret. I've already removed the cap, and I just want to take a second and give this a little spin and let you listen to the dial, or the turret, whatever you like to call it, see what it sounds like. And as you can tell, it does not have quite as audible a click as its elevation turret does, but you can feel them. They're definitely there. They're just not particularly loud. And the turret overall, as you can see, has just a significant amount of wiggle. It's not enough that it's like easy to pop out of the detent and go to the next one without noticing it. But it is definitely not as tightly machined or designed as its elevation brother. And we're going to go ahead and pop this little cap off. That is what is going to allow you to reset the zero on this turret. It will then slide off, and it has fine splines on the inside of that turret that align with the splines on your erector. I looked inside of there and I didn't see any O-rings, so there may be some back here where you can't quite see them, but you'll want to have, a mind to be careful with this if you're going to be pulling this off and trying to reset it in inclement weather, because I can't say for sure where it is sealed, and you could potentially get moisture back behind this cap if you're not careful. I do like this finger removable cap though. That's a nice feature. And there you see we have it back on there. The zero lines up nicely. And overall, for a cap turret, it is it's pretty good. I would actually prefer it to be slightly shorter, but that's just my preference whenever it comes to cap turrets. I don't feel the need for them to be tall, because I'm basically never going to use them except when establishing the zero for the rifle in the first place. But I think that's all we need to look at here at the bench, and we will go ahead and head out and start looking at some targets. So the first thing we want to look at out here in the field is going to be our eye chart, and we are currently at 50 yards. We're going to start out at the 6 power minimum on this Arken scope. go ahead and start zooming us in. Actually, I'm going to bring this crop in just a little bit. There we go. Try to fill a little bit more of that screen of yours up. So 6 power. Going to get up to 10 power. Still looking very nice. That is 20. And then finally we get to 24. And what we can see is a really nice image. We can make out all 3 lines of letters and all 4 lines of the letters and the 3 lines of numbers there on our letter number chart. Our color representation out there on the right side is looking good. And if I move our point of aim here just a little bit, I'm going to come up here to the bullseye. That's it right there. You can see we can make out those 6.5 Creedmoor bullet holes as well as all of my handwriting. And over there to the left, now, you know, kind of bisected by the 9 o'clock stadia line, is our playing cards, which we can make out quite a bit of the fine detail on as well. And I know you NRL shooters like your fine reticles, and you can see that this one is not going to take up a tremendous amount of real estate when you're looking at those smaller targets. Even those club logos in the middle of that 3 are not obstructed by the hash marks, so you could easily pick out individual elements of those cards at your leisure. The last thing I want to state is that the blacks of those heavier lines and of the larger letters, while are not perfectly black, they are pretty darn close, so we can say that there is a very minimal amount of chromatic aberration, even coming off of that very brightly lit eye chart that we have today. So what I'm going to do now is pan out to about 10 power, which is where I think the reticle really starts to become more useful. You know, you could use it down there at 6, but it's really about 10 power where it's starting to be big enough where you're going to be able to pick it out because the lines are so fine. And I am going to take a minute and just pan back and forth from left to right so that we can get an idea of how this thing performs in the area of fisheye. Get this tripod loosened up. I'm going to go over here first. We've got those trees and stuff in the background that are not in focus because we need them to be about there. They're at about 140 yards over there where the road disappears behind that bush. Those trees are about 140 yards. This one's back there at the back are about 125. And as we come down our building here, we see how that thin reticle is going to be a little bit challenging to use in dark areas. And I'm going to go ahead and bring our focus down here to about 30 yards to bring those letters into focus on that building. Just keep track of those vertical slats and see how they don't develop hardly any curvature at all as they go off the edge of our field of view. So that's a good sign of very minimal fisheye. I'm going to pause this here, or lock that in place right there, and go ahead and go back up in the zoom. And we'll see if that fisheye remains to a minimum. Dark our parallax back in. And I will try to be very smooth. Yeah, still looking really good. Pan across the dark side of this building and back to the car. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take us out to 100 yards and we'll have another look at this chart at that distance. I've got my car repositioned out there at 100 yards so that we can take another look at this eye chart. Again, we're going to start out at 6 power. I'm going to zoom up through our power range. There's 10. 20. And finally 24 power. Just see if I can tweak anything extra out of this guy. Yeah, I think that's about as good as it's going to get. Got the parallax set, so let's just go ahead and talk about it. Our contrast between our letters and our white sheet is still giving us very little chromatic aberration. On my screen I can't say if that fourth line of letters is visible, but the first 3 are, and all 3 lines of the numbers are legible, and we can still make out quite a bit of the fine detail on our playing cards, as well as the 6.5 Creedmoor bullet holes in the bullseyes. So at 100 yards, this is the image you would see at full magnification, and that is a very nice image. Color representation still looks very nice. The Japanese glass that Arken's putting in these things is clearly doing its job, giving us a nice flat image, as we saw as we panned across the barn earlier in the 50-yard segment of the video. And overall, there wasn't a tremendous amount of brightness drop. A little bit right there. When you get above 16 and you're going into that 20, we do see a little bit of drop. It's not dramatic, but if you're worried about it, you can just run this thing at 16 power. You won't have to worry about it. So yeah, just a little bit. The camera's actually exaggerating that a little because your eye is going to adjust to a degree for that difference in brightness. But if you were using this in a low light situation, you are going to notice some dimming up there at the 24 power versus down here at the 6, where it is very bright and very crisp. I am going to pan just a little bit with the 6 power, just so we can get an idea of what that looks like. So that yellow, orange cone, the distant one is at 100 yards. This is the closer one where I was previously parked at 50 yards. And this building, front face of it is going to be at about 28 yards from where I'm standing right now. You can see without adjusting the parallax down here at the 6 power, it's still going to give us a decent depth of field. If I adjust it a little bit, it's going to sharpen up. But if you were just using this for quick scanning, you wouldn't really need to do that. I'll go ahead and pan back to the car. As before, that pile of gravel is going to be at about 120 yards. The grass behind it is going to be right around 130, and then the trees behind the grass are going to be at about 140 yards. I'm going to take a quick second to zoom in on that grass behind it, just so we can kind of see what kind of detail we're going to get in a more natural environment as opposed to our moving stuff around. There we go. You can see how there's just a difference in parallax setting between the 100 and 120-ish yards that grass is at, or 130-ish. To get it nice and sharp where we can make out the little seeds growing on it. But if we dial back down, then our chart comes back in a nice focus, even out there at the edge of our field of view. Not sure what else we need to talk about here at this distance, and I think I will go ahead and wrap this up and take us out to the floodplain where we can look at some things at longer distances. I have a setup out here in the floodplain, and the first thing we are going to take a look at are some area regulation signs at 310 yards. Currently sitting at the 6 power, and I have our parallax adjusted to the 200 mark, and we're going to see how that works out for us. And if I need to adjust it a little bit when we zoom in, I will do that. But at this distance, or excuse me, at this magnification, we have a nice bright image with a decent field of view. That is 12 power, so that's halfway through the magnification range. There is 20, and that is 24, and you did notice a little bit of dimming of that image compared to when we were at 6 power. But that is going to be expected for a magnification of 24. And I am going to tickle this parallax just a touch and see if I can make that look a little better. Yeah, so I moved that just ever so slightly past the 200-yard mark, and I think that has sharpened that up a little bit for us. But overall, I'm going to go ahead and turn on our illumination to the number 6 setting. And that is what it's going to look like in daylight against a white target. It is visible, you can tell that it's red, but it sure isn't particularly bright. It's not popping out like you would want from something like an LPVO or a red dot. But as far as chromatic aberration, we are seeing a little bit of tint to those otherwise black letters on the white pages. The ones on the yellow backer are a little bit more naturally black just because of the lower contrast. But we're not seeing a tremendous amount of fringing out around the edges of the white pages, so that's good. And the words on all of those, except maybe that one over there on the right, are legible. You may be able to see that on a bigger screen. I'll let you be the determiner of that. That is the sort of image that we're going to get at 310 yards. And our depth of field down there towards the bottom of the field of view down there at the 6 o'clock where that grass is, that's going to be about 200 yards, maybe a little bit more, maybe 225, as compared to the signs at 310. And then the berm, the grass growing behind the signs, is going to be in the 340, 350 yard range, depending if you're talking top or the bottom of that berm. So the depth of field is usable. You wouldn't be needing to adjust that tremendously in order to have a usable image to take a shot. But I'm going to go ahead and get this zoomed out and move us to the left to look at our first building. Don't mind the noise of the car driving by. It is a weekend and this is a popular area. With them gone, we will continue without the noise pollution. Gonna pan slowly, looking for any fisheye here at the 6 power. So go past these power poles. It's doing a pretty good job. And then we're gonna find ourselves over here at our first building. Get that turret locked down. I'm going to adjust the parallax just a hair, and we'll see what that looks like as we get zoomed in. So starting at 6, there's 10, 20, and finally 24. And with the sun coming out from behind some of the clouds, we are seeing a little bit more fringe up on the top of those transformers where they are getting some more direct sunlight. But we are able to make out our little red 75 sticker down there on the bottom of the center transformer. And the bricks on the building are looking pretty clear as well. I've brought the exposure up a little bit, and while it's making that chromatic aberration a little bit more dramatic than it would be with the naked eye. It does allow us to pick out some more of the detail on the side of the building. And we can see the difference between the more lighted side of the building in those bricks as opposed to the ones on the more shadowed side of the building. But we can also see some of that hail damage on the top of that stainless pipe. And if you look down at the metal framework that the bricks are sitting on, we can make out the individual bolt heads with very little difficulty. Went ahead and adjusted that side focus again. Back down there a little bit closer to the 200 mark, and I think that's improved that image considerably. So as I suspected, the side focus is going to be a matter of fiddling with it until you get it right. When you're looking through the scope with your naked eye, that's going to be a lot more apparent. It's just a little bit more challenging here for me with the small screen and the glare that I'm getting off the screen at the same time. So I hope this image looks good for all of you. I'm going to dial back the zoom to about 20, just because I want to talk about some of the other details we can see, which are those power lines coming off the building, going back to our power pole. But as you might expect with this much magnification, you have a very limited field of view. I think at that distance we're only looking at about 24 feet. Something like that. I think it was 8 feet per 100 yards. So you're just going to have a tight field of view even at 20 power. So at 24 power, tightened up just a little bit. That's what you're going to have to compensate with. If you don't need that much magnification, you can dial it back down there to 16 and probably pick up, about 4 to 6 feet of field of view per 100 yards. So you're going to be closer to about 36 to 40 feet field of view if you only do 16 power. And then that just increases from there as you go back down. So what we're going to do now is pivot once again over to the left to a building at about 550 yards. Here we are. Get everything leveled out a little bit. I will get zoomed in. I will adjust that side focus because I'm fairly confident it will need it. There's 10 power. We're going to keep an eye on that power pole just to the edge of our field of view and see if it starts to bend any as we get to our maximum magnification right here. No, it still looks pretty good and straight, so that's nice. I will touch up that side focus. I think maybe about right there is maximum clarity. And what we can see on our transformer is our red 75. The elements on top of there are also pretty clear. We can see power lines coming from the building out to that pole, as well as the hail damage in that steel pipe. So really all of the details that we were able to pick out on the 300-yard building, we are also able to see out here at 550 yards. What we could not see at the 300-yard building was the ladders. I was concerned that today there would be a lot of distortion in the air from the rain and humidity, but fortunately the air is pretty still, so the mirage is at a minimum. You can see a little bit of it there, moving more vertically than left to right, but not too bad. The scope is dealing with it rather well. We can also make out quite a bit of detail in the grass down there below the stairs, as well as the details on the ladder, or the steps themselves, where we can see the heads of the bolts that support them. Overall, if you were taking shots at this distance, I'm going to go ahead and turn this power off for the illumination. You can see what that looks like blacked out. Crosshair is defined well enough that you would be able to take shots even in that shadowed area back there at the tree line. And you have enough precision there, I think, that you could even try to engage small targets at that distance. Overall, looking pretty good. I think we're going to shut this off here after I pan back to where we began, and then we will step out to about 1,000 yards and look at some other buildings and see how this scope, which really is intended for longer distances, performs at that range. What I want to do is keep an eye on these power poles as we go back across at our minimum magnification and see if we detect any unusual fisheyeing. I doubt it, but you never know. There's our first building. That power pole there was at about 200 yards. This one is going to be at about 150. And then our last one here is at about 110 yards before we settle back down here at our regulation signs. And there we have it. So good performance so far, out to 550 yards. And we will see how it does at the more extended distances. So the last stop on our tour through the floodplain today is going to be here to look at our building at just over 1,100 yards. Obviously we're down here at the 6 power, and I have the brightness maybe just a little too bright, but that's because I don't want to have to adjust it again when we get up to the maximum, because it is going to dim a little bit. We'll go up through our power range. There's 10 power, 16, 20, and 24. And now we are starting to see a little bit more of that mirage, which is going to negatively affect our overall sharpness, just because no scope is going to be able to overcome the physical barriers caused by the atmosphere itself. It just is what it is. But with that being the case, we do have a pretty good image. We can see our antenna on top of the building. The glare coming off of that roof vent, there's a stainless steel shroud on it, and the sun is reflecting off of it, is definitely bright, but the flare off of it is minimal, as is the chromatic aberration coming off of it. It's actually handling that excess light pretty well, especially since I have the exposure turned up a little bit. I am going to pan just a little bit to the right over here and take a look at our power transformers. Get them in the field of view at the same time. And while we have our reticles against the darker background, I'm going to go ahead and turn our illumination on. And you'll be able to see what that looks like contrasted against the darker green foliage of the tree line. But on our power pole, which is at basically the exact same distance as the building, we can make out our individual transformers, and we get an idea of what that reticle is going to look like against a relatively torso-sized target. Had to pause there for a little plane flying by. And even on the top of our transformers, we can see those individual insulator can size elements sitting up there on top. And if you compare those to the fine lines of our reticle, even those would not be heavily obstructed if you were trying to target something, say beer can size at 1,000 yards, which is sort of absurd unless you were just an absolute banger. But that does give you an idea of the scale of our reticle at that distance. Go ahead and pan back over here just for a moment. Take a look at our stairs. Let's see how those are looking. It'd be a good day if I could find a day when there wasn't a constant air traffic going over the top of this area. But it is what it is.
So we can just about make out all of those individual handrails, but the mirage is making some of them ripple and blend together. But if you take that and contrast what that would be like for a man-sized target, you know, you'd have no trouble picking that out at that distance. And with that said, I think that is all we need to look at out here in the floodplain today, and I will wrap this up and give you my final thoughts.
So now we're back here at the bench to wrap up this video and give you my final thoughts on this scope. And those of you may have noticed the title of this was warranty tested, and that refers to the fact that this scope that you see before you right now is not the original scope that I had for the majority of the filming of this review. That one had to be sent back to Arken because it developed an internal contamination on the lenses. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it appeared to be some sort of lubricant that had gotten loose from wherever it was supposed to be and had formed a vast series of droplets all over the inside, to the point where the scope was still, you could see through it, but I mean, it was obviously malfunctioning in some way. So I contacted Arken. They asked for some images of the defect that I was seeing, and then they immediately issued me a return and replaced it with this scope. So I can say that Arken was quick and responsive to warranty issues and did not give me any runaround. They just took the scope back and sent me this one. I did have to wait about 3 weeks because they said they were out of stock. And so when they got them in stock, they priority shipped me this scope. So that is what I'm referring to when I say the warranty tested, because the original one that I got that was new had an issue and had to go back. But this one, which I have now had for a little over a month and have had to the range a couple of times, has not presented any of those issues that I saw with the original scope. So that's a good thing. And I am going to have some compliments for the scope. I do really enjoy the turret on the elevation. It has tracked flawlessly. I did some little box tests with the 22 that is fairly accurate at 50 yards, and I mean, no issues whatsoever. Haven't had any issues with the parallax. It has remained nice and smooth and consistent. And I can say that the markings on here are fairly accurate. Obviously, when you get above 200, I mean, you're just guessing because there's not any indication between 200 and infinity. On the 22 and the 5.56 rifle that I tested this on, I wasn't shooting past 100 yards anyway, so it really was not an issue. I still not a huge fan of the illumination dial, just because I wish it had taller jimping on there so you could get a better grip on it, but it has not had any issues. It's turned on every time I've turned it on and turned off every time I've turned it off. So that's good. Same thing being true with this dial over here. It's a little looser than I like, but the clicks are consistent. I didn't do a whole bunch of windage dialing except for the box test, and it worked just fine. And it did track consistently. If I needed 4 MOA of wind, you know, it'd do the 4 MOA or whatever the calculation was in the mils. I used the reticle to measure it and then just dial it in, and it was pretty much spot on every single time. So that kind of brings me to, who do I think this is for? Obviously, I think it's for people who are doing air guns and rimfires, things where you're going to be consistently inside of 200 yards. I think it does great. For people who are going out there at longer distance, we did see that the depth of field, even though the parallax is pretty vague, our depth of field was sufficient that even at those longer distances out there to 1,000 yards and beyond, the image was perfectly good. And our reticle is fine enough that it isn't going to be obstructing even small targets at those distances. So really, I think just if you need 24 power in whatever application you're using, and you're just like general purposing this thing for all kinds of different shooting, I think you'll be happy with it. I think the price is good. You do need to pay attention to those potential warranty issues. If you might have them, you can go ahead and send it back in, and they seem like they will take care of you. I did not inform them that I was anyone doing a review. I was just a customer with an issue, and they took care of it. So that is about as much as you can ask aside from just, you know, not having an issue in the first place. But, you know, all manufacturers do have problems, and the good ones take care of them, and that's what Arken did. Aside from that, I think it's a good weight. You know, if you wanted to throw this on top of a semi-automatic, an AR-10, I think you'd be perfectly good. You may prefer the other reticle that has the more Christmas tree style in that. I like this one for applications where you're going to be dialing most of the time and not holding down there in the reticle. So if that's your preference, you may want to give this a look. The glass is good. It's definitely as good as anything else in this price point. You know, I like it, the glass quality on this, as much as the Venom, which I really raved about. I can't wait to get one of these maybe in that 4 to 16 and see how it compares more directly to the 3 to 15. But 4 6 to 24, you know, I'm really pleased with this scope. So I don't think I have anything more than that to say. If you have any experience with this, good, bad, if you had to use the warranty, you know, throw a comment down there in the comment section so, you know, we kind of help inform other buyers. If you like this review, go ahead and hit that like button. If you want to see more stuff like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. But that is all I have for today. I will see you all in the next review, and you have a good one.